Hello, and welcome to another season of the Storied Arcs podcast. I am your co-host, Mike.
And I'm your co-host, Alex.
And today in our, we use a lot of different terms for these episodes, a zero episode, a creator spotlight, a series intro episode. All of those are true. We are diving into the work of Jonathan Luna and Sarah Vaughn with Alex and Ada. And this is a book that it was on my to-be-read pile for a very long time. I only recently got the deluxe edition, read it all. I'm very, very excited to talk about it. But it's one of those that I think I just completely missed or just never saw in single issue. I still have never held a single issue of it.
I mean, I remember this when it came out. I remember seeing it on the shelf. I think it not because it has like an overly distinctive kind of cover to it, but it has a very specific style to it where like there's like a white box in the upper third. Right. That's the title, and then like 2/3 of the page is the artwork there. So it does stand out. I remember seeing this book out there. So it initially came out. It came out from issue 1 was November 2013. Goes through 15 issues to June 2015. I think it basically came out monthly. Actually, I did read somewhere that it came out about every 5 to 6 weeks. So there may be like a month technically where it would miss, but it was consistent all the way throughout. So like if it came out at the end of 1 month, it may come out the beginning of like 2 months after. So it seems like it skipped a month, but it really didn't. It came out pretty consistently. I remember seeing it, and it was a book that I think at some point maybe I picked up one of the trades and flipped through it. Maybe I'm sure I picked up trade 1. There was no reason why I would have picked up trade 2 and flipped through it, but I would have picked up trade 1 sometime in 2014 or something like that, or maybe in 2015, possibly after the series was done, and flipped through it and thought like, this is something I'll read eventually. Because I knew the name Jonathan Luna. I knew who he was from his work with his brother Joshua. So it was like a book I'll get to eventually. And gosh, I don't think I actually sat down and read it until a couple years ago as we're recording this now. So maybe.
Why is that? I think it's one of those that it seems very interesting to me, but it's a very specific length of read. It's not like 15 issues, the deluxe hardcover. I will read like a Tom King deluxe, 12 issue maxi series in 2 sittings. Yeah. And I know that almost any length series can be a 1 sitting thing for you. Yeah. But
and something like this, I think it's a combination of, I know I'll probably read this in 1 sit, but there was never any urgency to read it. And so it just sits there in my library. I'll read it eventually. Actually, I didn't have it for a long time. I think part of that was it was always like one of the books I saw, either digitally or at a shop. And it always reminded like, oh yeah, I always wanted to read that one. But I have an app that tracks all my comics, things I have, things I haven't read, and also a wish list. It was never actually on my wish list. Because it's one of the things I never thought about.
And it's one that I don't remember any water cooler talk about it. I mean, that's the thing that makes you read it sooner, right?
Yeah.
Is it people at the shop or sitting around talking about it?
And I guess for you, this would have been coming out right before you started getting in, right? Because you were about late 2015, 2016, right there. Because you were around DC Rebirth, right?
I was definitely around. I was at the end of, I started pulling Batman. I pulled the issue 44 of New 52 and like all the stuff when Gordon was Batman.
Okay, so that would have been late 2014, right. Early 2015. So you would have been in the shop for the first time as this book was coming out.
And specifically for the timeline might be contradictory here, but I started pulling the Batman late into Snyder's run, about halfway through. And then started exploring indie comics because of the Warren Ellis Bond on Dynamite. And I think that was probably 2015, though. That was when I started exploring beyond the superhero shelves.
Yeah.
So I would have maybe been the tail end of this, or like maybe the trades would have been on the wall.
That lines up about right. But if you weren't diving into, I mean, if you're looking at,
I was not looking for money to spend. I was in grad school. I was what do I need to read?
yeah, and if you're looking into something like James Bond, again, I've read every single James Bond book that Dynamite's put out in the past almost 10 years. Because I think that first One Else book was about 2014, 2015. I've read them all and I love them. They're great. But that's an IP
Oh yeah, yeah.
franchise. Yeah.
I
So,
was there. I
so
was there for an IP, and
yeah, a
I
specific
saw
James Bond IP. Yeah, yeah.
well, and the
Versus,
cover art was
yeah,
like that trail of blood in the
yeah.
snow
They're pretty,
on Varner.
those
Yeah,
books are pretty great.
it's pretty
But yeah,
great.
but you're saying at that point, though, you weren't like, let
I
me
wasn't
see
exploring.
what
I was on a
other
mission.
things there are. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, no,
Um,
you would have been there right around this time. And I said, I don't recall there being a whole lot of chatter about this book. Maybe when it first came out, I probably wasn't paying attention to it, comic news as much at that point. But I think it was just for me. It's 15 issues, one deluxe edition. I knew I could knock it out, but again, I think it was a lack of urgency. And so it wasn't until I actually let me go ahead and buy this thing so I have it. So when I go through my unread list, well, when I go through my unread list, it's pretty much at the top because it's Alex and Ada. So alphabetically, it's going to be right when I look at my
right.
app, it's going to be one of the first ones I see. And so I finally just knocked it out. And yeah, when I first read it, it's a pretty quick read to begin with. That's just kind of their style. And how the book is, you move pretty quickly, kind of regardless of the speed at which I read through comics. But yeah, it was a lack of urgency that it was like it came out, it's done. There's no conversation about it. I've got 45 other things here to read that are current, that are coming out now. Let me focus on that. And then if I had any downtime to read something else, it was just like, well, do I want to jump into something new here, or do I want to reread Sandman again for the seventh time? Do I want to go through? Do I want to flip through? DC New Frontier for the 45th time? And I end up doing that. It's like it's very much like jumping into a new television show that's not too long, but it's complete. Do you do that, or let me just fire up some episodes of The Office again?
Yeah.
It's that exact same sort of kind of quandary of do I read something new, or do I just instead of the whatever time I'd spend doing that, just go through something familiar because gosh, I love this art, or I love the storyline, or what have you. So it never
Oh yeah,
felt.
I feel that right now. I'm
Oh yeah,
dragging my feet getting through Severance
yeah.
because TV
Severance
is
is
not
good.
something I do as a conquest. TV is what I do when I'm ready to be checked out for the day. And I'm like, I can turn on any season of The West Wing. I don't even have to be facing the TV.
Yeah,
I can be scrolling on my phone.
I can hear it and not even hear every word, right? Hear like every third or fourth word and know what's
Right.
going on.
Yep.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and I want to give new shows, especially when they're good shows, the amount of attention that they deserve.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and
But I prefer to give that attention to reading.
I think that's a great point. I think that's again another kind of factor in why it took me so long to read this, because it was like, well, you know, do I want to? It's a new thing, so I got to sit down and actually read it. I got to pay attention to it the first time through, and it was like, do I want to devote that time to it right now, or do I want to, because it's one thing to read 15 issues of a series that's done, or like I got 15 brand new floppies that I could read and pay attention to, but that's the stuff's going on currently right now. And they're all different books, different authors, different artists. And so I'm staying engaged in the material versus just plowing through a completed series. So, so it took me a while to get to, even though it's been on my radar, I would say almost 10 years, somewhere in the middle of the run, I was aware of the book. It was just, it was I'll get to that at some point book, that's really kind of how it fell.
That's how it's been for me. I pre-ordered the deluxe edition when it came out because I kind of read up on it and I was like, in a spoiler-free way, I was like, that seems very up my alley.
Yeah, there's a hook
And,
there. There's a
and
hook there.
well, and I think we'll probably get into this with with everything we're gonna do, but I think Luna's art is divisive.
It
Like
is.
I hear people critique it, but I think if you pick it up and you look at it and you dig the art, then there's nothing that you're not going to love about this series.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
me. It
Yeah.
was like I love the clean artwork. I,
The
I'm
with this,
resistant to call it minimalist.
yeah,
Uh, certainly not
there's a
as a critique.
simplicity to it, but it's simplistic in a different way versus like some of my
Jeff
favorite artists of all
Lemire's
time.
simplicity.
Yeah,
Yeah,
well, I
I
mean,
mean Jeff Lemire's simplicity is he has five characters,
well, yeah,
and
but there's also like a there's there's like an unfinished nature to what someone like Lemire or Matt Kent do.
right,
Um, where there's like a
Justin
sketchiness,
Mattson.
the watercolor, yeah, there's a messiness to it that's intentional. I mean, like my favorite artist of all time is Darwin Cook, and Darwin Cook, very simple lines, simple shapes, flat colors. I absolutely love it. There's a the way that Luna draws, it's on it's on the same kind of axis, but like it's tweaked a little bit, and we can get to that. I think we'll probably get into that next week when we actually get into the book itself. But divisive is the right word, and I do think there are some legit criticisms for it. But of course, criticism is what it is. It is what it is.
Well,
Do
and
you like
beauty's in
what
the
you
eye of the
like?
beholder, especially
Yeah,
for
yeah. You
comics.
like what you like, you don't like what you don't like. But I do think there are what those criticisms are. I can see that in the work. Doesn't bother me too much in this case. But we'll get into that more, I think, next week when we actually get into the book. We should probably talk about how we're going to discuss it. We mentioned multiple times here. It's 15 issues. And
15 issues.
it's collected in 3 trades. So we'll be discussing it one trade at a time. So it's 1 through 5, 6 through 10, 11 through 15. Very simple and straightforward. I'm gonna guess though the easiest way to get the book now is probably the deluxe edition.
Yeah, I checked. I mean, granted, I checked the Cincinnati library, which not everyone who's listening has access to, but uh, they have the hardcover deluxe edition. Hoopla has it.
Yeah,
Libby has it.
yeah, and that's I'm gonna guess it's entirely possible at this point that the original trades are no longer in print. So whatever you find out there is what you find, and you may be able to find them at like a used bookstore or something like that. Your comic shop might still have them, but it's probably not something your comic shop can order. But the deluxe hardcover probably is something that is. So I'm gonna guess that the complete collection is the way you can get it most easily. And the way I'm rereading it, I have that deluxe edition digitally, and it's very clear, like with issue numbers, basically. Like they put a whole page of like, you know, before each issue, so it's very clear. It isn't like a book we just read, Ex Machina, where they just run the issues. They ran story arcs back to back to back, where the
Right.
issues were just there and they didn't put like a title page in or the cover to let you know there was a break. You just kind of had to know based on how someone like BKV writes his scripts. But with Alex and Ada, it's very clear. So if you have the deluxe edition, it should be pretty easy to follow.
Yeah, and speaking of the deluxe edition, I'm going to read the synopsis from Image. You and I think probably have our own elevator pitches for it.
Yeah,
But here's theirs, and I will warn people there is a very mild spoiler alert for the toward the end of the first trade.
yeah, a little bit.
That I think you and I don't really care about it, but are sensitive to spoiler alerts. So skip forward 30 seconds from when I start talking, and you'll be fine. But here it is. From Jonathan Luna and Sarah Vaughn comes Alex and Ada, a sci-fi drama set in the near future. The last thing in the world Alex wanted was an X5, the latest realistic android. But after Ada is dropped into his life, he discovers she is more than just a robot and takes a huge risk to unlock Ada so she can think for herself and explore life as a sentient android. Can they survive the consequence? So I think it's a nice ambiguous question there at the end because you
Yeah.
don't know what the consequences mean. I think with an AI story, you would think the direction that ominous consequences go could mean like she becomes self-aware and accesses the nuclear arm codes or something like that, which I
Well,
think is a very different book than what we have here.
it is, but I think the reason I think you and I don't consider that a spoiler is because this is a book about androids and AI and interacting with humans, and any story that's about that inherently has some undertones of what does it mean to be alive? What is sentient life? What is programming versus you know, sentient thought kind of thing. And so so again, spoilers, this book is about that. That happens in this book. So I think that's an inherent question anytime you have any sort of story about androids and AI and things like that, and quote unquote artificial life. Um,
Yeah. So
what it comes
my elevator
I
pitch,
say, well, what it comes down to is, what do you do with that story? What kind of story are you telling around that? That the
right? That's
idea
a
of sentient
setting
life,
more than a
yeah,
story. Yeah.
yeah. The idea of, is this is AI sentient, or has it become sentient? That isn't what the story is about, because that's what every AI story is about. This one included. So
Yeah.
that's why I think you and I don't think that's a spoiler.
No, I don't think it's a spoiler. Actually, the part that I meant as a spoiler is that he unlocks her.
Oh, yeah, okay, sure, yeah,
That's not in the first few issues.
yeah.
Um, but it's pretty blatantly.
It is. It's set up pretty early. So.
Yeah. So, yeah. So my elevator pitch for this, my wife was asking me about it before we recorded, and I said, it's Blade Runner meets Her, and
Yeah,
it's like
yeah,
the it's the philosophical discussion of Blade Runner. The rest of the tone is not like Blade Runner, but it's
yes,
the philosophical questions of Blade Runner with the tone of Her. And I think I would describe it as like it's definitely sci-fi, but I would say it's got like just enough touch of humor in it that I feel like it's not a comedy. But like, his interactions, especially along with his grandma, I was getting
yeah,
chuckles out of.
yeah,
I think it's the same dark kind of sense of humor that Her has. And it's
yeah.
certainly about questions of, human loneliness and the need for AI.
Yeah, the need for companionship. Yeah, I think what helps in that realm is the first part of that description, which is the near future. I think so many
Yeah.
stories that we're used to dealing with androids and AI, it's always some far future, and it's always some dystopian future. It's always like after the robots have taken over, or after revolution and the world is destroyed, that sort of thing. So I think in that way, it is much more, it's closer to what our world actually is. It's like our world, and even our world 10 years ago when this book was coming out, our world plus like 3 or 4 notches above. You know, the houses, everything in the world is recognizable. You know,
Right.
um, and it's not too far of a leap to see how we go from where we are now to the world that the Alex character interacts with. Setting aside the actual androids, like the idea of the way the televisions and the screens work and things like that, self-driving cars, all these sorts of things. There are versions of those that exist now, that you could see.
Yes.
Well, if we go down this path, this is kind of where we could see our society go, without having major changes to our society. It's just, instead of the television being a large, physical thing, it's just like a projector, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's like a floating hologram kind of thing. So I think that helps. I think that naturally helps with the tone of the book, and that it isn't like this end of the world scenario. This is just our world kind of ish.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of those where it has the healthy separation. It's like you're not going to confuse this, like, wait, is Joe Biden president in this book or something, like,
Yeah. Right.
but nothing needs to be explained to you. You just
Yeah.
pick it up by watching.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Right. You don't need that, but it's also very much set. Actually, I do think they're in like the DC area. I think they're meant to be set in. It actually doesn't. It doesn't technically matter where they are, but I do think they're set like in
okay.
Northern Virginia, outside DC, somewhere like that. I think that's where the Luna brothers are from and live. Because at one point they mentioned going down to DC, or something like that, when he's talking about like taking Ada somewhere or something like that. So yeah, it's very much set here, but you don't. At no point do you question, but when is this? Like the year doesn't matter. The time frame doesn't matter, because they've set it up to a point where you're not paying attention to that. It's not what the story is about.
Well, and the technology isn't like so innovative that he's introducing a new concept. This stuff that's been
Yeah,
dreamed about
yeah,
in
yeah,
future books forever. In
yeah,
fact, I was just thinking about that earlier today, because I was thinking, what a tightrope it is to project future technology in books,
Totally.
or movies or anything, because you go watch like the old Sean Connery movies for Bond, and it's like, oh, it's a radio that's small enough to fit inside my shoe. Oh my gosh. Um, and then you have to explain to someone in Gen Z what a radio is,
Yeah.
and and why it's not impressive, or why it would be, I guess. But
Or a movie like Hackers or The Net that were obsolete 5 minutes after they were released.
right, well, I mean, there were those, and then what I was thinking about was like, okay, well, who has done this well? And I thought of Christopher Nolan in The Dark Knight. He invents that like sonar technology to
Oh,
like
okay. Yeah,
for his
sure.
big heist in China, and then
Hmm.
he uses it at the end of the movie to find Joker, and it it felt it was like one of those plausible impossibility things where it was like, it looks futuristic, it looks cool. That doesn't exist. I don't think anyone is gonna like watch this movie and be like, we need to come up with that right now. Like no one's working on it. Whereas like, you watch Iron Man 1 and there are people on TikTok who have made like functional Iron Man helmets. There are people who have
Yeah.
made operating systems that look like what Tony was
Yeah.
using on his computer because they are like, dang, that's cool. I need to have that. Whereas like the sonar thing was like, that's a really cool gimmick. It looks cool. I believe that it's high tech. I don't want that for my house.
And but I wonder though if that's because that specific case from The Dark Knight is iterating off of technology that already exists, because that was using people's cell phones.
Right.
It was illegally tapping into people's cell phones to create a sonar network, you know? So he's not inventing a new technology. He's basically just being a criminal and using everyone's personal computing device against them, versus something like Iron Man, where you're like, that doesn't exist, that heads up kind of display, but that's cool. I want to make that, you know?
Right. Yeah.
And so you can make that, and then once you do, or if you do, you can then iterate well beyond that. And now the thing that's in Iron Man looks like a piece of junk because we figured out how to go so many steps beyond that, versus let's take something that exists and just tweak it in a way that makes it looks cool and different. And I think about, when you think about some of the technology we see, or you when you start reading Alex and Ada here, I mentioned like the television screens, the computer screens. He when you see Alex at work, he sits behind a big desk, nothing on it, right? Because the computer screen just kind of pops up, and it is just a big heads up display. That's all that's
Right.
there. That's something that probably could exist. We've seen things like that. That idea has been in you're right, in various sci-fi stories for forever. So it doesn't feel out of place. Also because again, he's still sitting behind a desk. He still goes to an office and sitting behind this giant desk. There's just no monitor there. There's no keyboard there. There's no CPU there. It's just he just has a floating screen
Right.
in front
Well,
of
and
him.
had I read this 2 years ago, I would have been like, they didn't know everyone would be working from home.
Yeah.
And now everyone's forced to go back to the office. And it's like,
Yeah.
well, nope, that still works.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
It does.
so,
But you're right there, though. There is always the danger anytime you're trying to, quote unquote, predict the future in that way, because you can end up looking silly.
right. Yeah. I mean, the best way to do it was what the Flintstones did, which was like,
Go to the
yeah,
past.
yeah. Well, they go to the past, but they had like have TVs and stuff. It's like, how's that work? It's like, shut up, you don't get it. It's
Yeah.
it's we don't care. It doesn't matter.
If that question concerns you, put the book down. This one isn't for you.
Oh yeah, book or show or whatever. It's
Yeah.
just
Just
like,
go ahead.
just
Yeah.
walk away.
Yeah. Go ahead
Uh,
and sit. Go ahead and sit this one out.
you
You're,
can't
you're
you
asking the
can't
wrong questions.
also you can't use a dinosaurs vacuum cleaner. Like
Yeah.
you're just not hanging with the tone of this book.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas I think Alex and Ada, like I said, it like the technology and the technological advancements, since they did that near future thing, these are all things that it's like, sure, I can see that 5, 10 years. If self-driving cars are already a thing, how long it would take to pivot all of society to having a self-driving car is
Yeah. Well,
who knows how long. And
I
it's
think
like, and that's very American, that it's like we would rather have everyone in that country own 2 self-driving cars than invest in public
yeah, absolutely.
and
But I think it's interesting
have to
too
not
to
do
read this
things.
book now, again, about 10 years after it was published and finished. Um, this book is looking to the quote unquote near future, probably a little more than 10 years in their mind, because here we are now, and our relationship to AI is different than it was 10 years ago when this book was coming out. In
Oh
that,
yeah, I mean AI. If I had read this when it came out, it would have been like, yeah, yeah, Skynet. The hypothetical thing
yeah.
where it's like,
Exactly. You think of old pop culture, and now you think of the things they show here, like having the phone implant or whatever, like neural implant and all that. Having it just wired into your brain. The way that everything is automated, the way that you see their society rely on computers and command and things like that, and I think it reads differently now, looking at where we are in the world versus 10 years ago.
yeah,
And I don't know if that's it. Maybe it reads how it reads. Does it read good or bad to you? Maybe depends on where you are on AI and the use of computing in that way.
yeah. I mean, I think I don't want to get into the book without getting into the book.
Yeah,
But
I think we've gone further into the book than I thought we might, but we've hinted at a lot of things about what this book is already kind of covered.
yeah, I guess the last thing I'll say about it is that if you're having any of the feeling of like, oh, this is kind of like tapped out, this whole like, oh, AI sentience, what's the deal with that? What's that like? Then, I would suggest to you that every time we have that conversation, we're also reflecting on human. Like,
Yes.
I don't think it's possible for us to talk about AI sentience and its will and freedom and all those other things without also talking about that for humans. And those are evergreen philosophical literary topics. So it's
100%.
like,
It's why these stories persist. This type of story persists because you're right. It is a metaphor. And again, maybe someday it won't be metaphor. Maybe someday it'll be literal. Maybe we'll have actual androids someday. But it always has been a metaphor for the rights of all people. You know,
right, which
any
is,
kind of
always,
any marginalized group.
which is still a theoretical thing, right? It's like,
Absolutely, it is. Yeah, yeah. I
it's
said
like we've had
someday it
that
may be literal.
abstract concept for years and years that like,
Mhm.
yeah,
We're still
that,
dealing with it, hence why they're still writing stories about it. And it's easier to use robots and AI as your platform, as your gateway into these stories versus, dealing with the actual people of that you're trying to represent here. So,
hence the
there are
brilliance of
parallels.
not all robots.
Exactly. Yeah. I think it's not all robots. It's part of this exists in Descender Ascender as well.
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
anything where you have the idea of androids, AI, specifically interacting with humanity. Anywhere that's the case, these issues are going to bubble up, and it's just a matter of what's your take on it. What are you what kind of story are you trying to tell? And I think Alex and Ada, this book is telling specifically from both Not All Robots and the Center, two books that we've talked about on the show. This is coming at it from a different angle. You know, this is this has it's not one that it's not unique to this story, but it's not an angle you see as often in terms of what does it mean to be human, and what's the driving force behind wanting to have sentient life or wanting to give sentient life to an android.
Yeah. And yeah, we'll leave it at that for now
Yeah,
because we
yeah,
do need to talk about the creators.
sure, yeah,
And so we've already kind of talked about Jonathan Luna, so I guess
yeah.
we might as well close that one off.
Oh, sure. Yeah. We'll close it off here. So yeah, as you mentioned, the book is created by Jonathan Luna and Sarah Vaughn. The way it's credited is Sarah Vaughn as writer, and then Jonathan Luna is writer and everything else, essentially. Artist, colorist, letterer, he does everything else. I do believe technically that they wrote the script for the first issue together. And then I think from there, Jonathan Luna is credited with story the rest of the way, and the actual scripts were written by Sarah Vaughn. So she'd be the writer of issues 2 through 15, but they crafted the story together. So it isn't
Yeah.
it isn't like
So I
a
think
Marvel method thing here.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. Like in TV, there's the writing convention where they use either the word and or the ampersand.
Yeah, yeah,
And I
yeah.
think
And
the and means they co-wrote it like together, and the
no,
ampersand other way around.
other way.
Okay,
Ampersand means you wrote together, and means you wrote separately.
right, yeah.
Effectively, yeah, yeah,
Perhaps even like two drafts is
yeah, yeah,
sometimes
yeah,
what the
yeah,
and
yeah.
means. It's like they did the initial writing of this, and
Mhm.
then somebody came through with the second pass.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
Then that would be and spelled out typically.
okay, right. I got it
But
backwards, but I knew there was a distinction.
there is a distinction there. So, but in this case, this book comes from both of them. It seems
It's a
very
little more
collaborative.
collaborative,
Again,
yeah.
the idea that where the story credit goes and then who actually physically writes the dialogue and the script out. I don't know if that matters as much, but Jonathan Luna, like I said, he's everything on the book. Writer, he wrote, drew, colored, letter. He did design as well. Of I think probably of like the title on the cover and things like that. We've already mentioned his brother Joshua, and I think if you know either of the Lunas, you know them together as the Luna brothers. They've done a lot of work together, and they're best known for that. And they're credited on their books as the Luna brothers. So in any book you see with they both worked on it, that's what's on the cover. A lot of times you just see like last names of the writer and the artist, maybe writer artist colors or something like that. On their books, you'll see the Luna brothers, and you're kind of meant to know that it's the most of their work has been done. Almost all their work has been done in Image, whether it's together or kind of Jonathan on his own. I'm gonna guess maybe Girls is the book people might know them the best from, the Luna brothers. That's probably where I knew them first. That's a book that probably where I first saw their names and saw their art. Other books they've worked on, Ultra, which I've worked on, which I've read, and then The Sword, which is a more recent one, which I haven't read. And again, those are all credited to the Luna brothers, the two of them working together. They do have a Marvel book they worked on with Brian Michael Bendis and Brian Reed as co-writers. It was Spider-Woman Origin. I think it was like a 4 or 5 issue kind of miniseries coming out of Bendis's New Avengers run. It was a retelling of Jessica Drew's origin. And again, like if you see those issues, it says Bendis, Reed, the Luna brothers. Like that's
Yeah,
what it
yeah.
was on how they were credited. They worked on the art on that book together. He
Interesting.
does.
Okay,
Oh,
so on Jonathan Luna's website, they have written by Brian Michael Bendis and ampersand Brian Reed,
yes.
pencils and cover Jonathan.
Yeah.
So no mention, but the fact that it specifies pencils and cover means someone else did the ink and color,
Yeah. Yeah.
and he just didn't
Well,
mention his
and I
brother.
don't know with their style, everything they do looks digital, so I doubt they have an inker. Um,
That's
yeah, so
um,
so maybe Josh was doing the color or whatnot.
color and
Um,
letter. Yeah.
yeah, and yeah, well, it was Marvel. They probably used their in-house lettering people.
Oh yeah.
But still, it's credited as the Luna Brothers, and all those books. If you see them, again, that's the stuff that they're probably best known for. He does have some. Well, he has some solo work. He's got a couple solo work. Like he's done some one shots over at Image. One's called the Phalanx, which is kind of it's like a '90s homage throwback, and another one called The Knight and the Lady of the Play. That one actually looks pretty interesting. I haven't seen that one. He also did an OGN called Bright Star and the Looking Glass, and these are all books that Jonathan Luna
I think
wrote and drew
Starbright in the looking.
himself. Yeah, so those are all things that he worked on by himself, put out by himself. He's got a couple other fairly notable books in Image that he worked with other writers on, other creators. Alex Nato with Sarah Vaughn. We'll talk about her in a second. They did another book together called Eternal Empire. So worked on Alex Nato together and clearly had another idea. This book, Eternal Empire. Two more that people probably know is 20XX with writer Lauren Keeley, sorry, Lauren Keeley, and then Quest with writer Crystal Wood. Those are probably the books that if you're looking for Jonathan Luna's name for interior work, those are the books you'll probably see. He's also done plenty of covers or variant covers for various books. Again, a lot of Image books, a couple other indie publishers, because he has a distinctive style. Again, we'll talk about the next week whether how distinctive it's how you feel about that distinctiveness. But he's done like any artist, has got plenty of cover work and variant cover. Before we started recording, you were talking about a comp for the Luna brothers, and you mentioned Moon and Ba, Fabi Moon and Gabriel Bra, the Brazilian twins who did Day Tripper and I Thought the Girls at Parties, Two Brothers, things like that. And I think it's very similar in terms of how these guys work together, because with Moon and Ba, there's ambiguity, or there's no distinction between who writes what, who draws what, anything like that. It just kind of, they work on the book and they put it out. I think the Lunas are like that, or at least close to like that. I think they write together. I do think Jonathan draws more than his brother Joshua does. But they have a similar working partnership. I think of also the Miranda brothers, who've done a book in a series called We Live, Roy and Anaki Miranda, another set of brothers that when you see their books on the cover, they're credited as the Miranda brothers. So very similar to the Lunas, that when they work together, you're buying a book because you're kind of already in that fan group. You like the work, you're following it, and you know that you're going to get a certain level and a certain kind of story from them. So that's Jonathan Luna, our writer, artist, color, letter, and just about everything else. And that leaves Sarah Vaughn, who Alex Naeda was her first credited comic work. I think she was in some other literary market, working in books in some fashion, but not comics. And I believe she was approached by Jonathan Luna, maybe on some other project that he was kind of tangentially aware of, and kind of got to talking and came up with this story, and what became Alex Naeda. And like I said, after they did this, they went and did another book, Eternal Empire. So she's been in comics and kind of since 2013, the past 10 years, has worked, I don't know about steadily, but has worked with other artists as well. Did a DC book that I was not aware of, a little miniseries called Dead Man, Dark Mansion, and Forbidden Love.
Yeah.
Was that?
I'd never heard of that book.
Yeah, listen, I'm not a Dead Man
reader. It does
reader.
not even look familiar. Like, I pulled the covers up on League of Comic Geeks, and I was like, I still remember it on the wall.
I'm not a Dead Man fan, really. Boston Brand. I don't know if he's listening to this, John, but he goes, listens, and goes to the same shop as us. I know he's a big Dead Man fan, because it's like a F-list character, so naturally it's one of his favorites. But she did that book with Lam Medina. Lam Medina is a great artist, the original artist on Fables, someone whose artwork I adore. But yeah, I knew nothing of this book.
And to be clear, just in case anyone out there, like, I did not hear you say Dead Man's stupid and you're stupid if you like him. All you said, which I think is the most diplomatic way, is just like, it's just not for me. Which I think is the same thing you've said, like when I bring up like a Red Hood book or something, you're like, yeah, it's just not a character I care about.
I put it in the same category with that. Like, Dead Man has had some cool stories, I think. There's a story going on right now in the Batman Brave and the Bold anthology, as we're recording this. There's it's a Dead Man Nightwing story, and like, I love Nightwing. Dick Grayson's probably my favorite DC character, and it's like, I don't get Dead Man. I don't, his thing of possessing it's weird. I don't know. But actually, what I think what's important about this book, again, it's subtitled Dark Mansion of Forbidden Love, and I think the idea of romance is something that kind of pervades a lot of Sarah Vaughn's work, because she's also contributed to an anthology called Fresh Romance, which was through Rosie Press / Oni Press. That came out, and she has the most recently is a book called Ruined, which she did with Sarah Winfield Cyril, and I think the overriding theme is that it has these romance tones, not like traditional romance, but there's that. I think that's a genre she taps into and brings into her work, which is obviously prevalent in Alex Naeda.
Yeah, well, and 2 more books on Image, which I'm sure is on your list.
Yeah.
But like, of her catalog, I've not read anything other than Alex Naeda. But Sleepless looks pretty great.
I'm sorry. Yeah, Sleepless. That's right. With Leila Del Duca,
and Eternal
another
Empire.
artist who I'm familiar with as well. Which again came after. So we see her enter into the comic space, the creator of comic space, with Jonathan Luna, kind of brings her in, and now we see her. She's expanded out, working with other artists, getting her own books out there, things like that, which I think is really cool. But yeah, that Sleepless actually does look. I mean, because the art looks great there. Leila Del
Covers
Duca
are killer.
is
Yeah,
a is a
that's
is a
really
wonderful
all.
artist.
I read like the image synopsis of it, and I looked at the covers, and I was like, it seems like a book that if I went to the shop this week and it was out on the new releases,
Yeah,
I'd pick up the first issue to see what it's about.
yeah.
I will say Eternal Empire is Sarah's other book at Image,
Mhm.
also
With
with
Jonathan
Jonathan
Luna.
Luna.
Yeah.
And if I were not going off the names of familiar people and just looked at the cover, it looks like a pass for me. It looks like,
Yeah.
just like fantasy-ish and not really long enough to be like a big world building, saga like epic. Instead,
Mm-hmm.
it's like a short story. And so my impression of stories in that realm of that length is like they either spend all of their time explaining the world to you, or they're like never explain the world because they're trying to get in and out of the story so quickly and the characters. And I'm like, it's just an awkward length to say. I was it 10 issues? It's this Eternal Empire thing where people seem
Yeah,
to be
it's
wielding power and there are dragons and stuff. It's like that's a lot of stuff to like get through character journeys,
it is.
plot,
It's a
story,
lot to get through. It's a lot to
everything in
muddle
10
through.
issues. I'm
Yeah.
like, so I'm skeptical. That being said, I think they cover a lot of ground in 15 issues in Alex and Ada. So it's like, who's to say they couldn't, change to fantasy and
Yeah. Yeah.
and do some fun, dynamic, and efficient storytelling. Because that's the thing is like, we just got off of Ex Machina on the podcast, and I was thinking back to like the issues where we would talk about like filler content.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh, here's the mayor of Baghdad, or the Russian guys, and
Yeah,
like the
like 5-6 pages of filler. Yeah.
yeah, and I don't think there's a page of filler in this book. Like, I think the
Eh,
closest thing you could call is like when it has like little breaks for comedy. But to me,
well,
that's such an important part of the texture of the book
yeah, I don't
that
think
I don't consider it
I don't
filler.
think there's filler. I will say something that I'll definitely mention when we get into it next week. I do think this book has some pacing issues. I don't think it's filler, but I don't. I think it could be a little more efficient in its storytelling. We'll get to that next week. I will say though, you're right. That Sleepless book with Leila Del Duca at Image, that looks interesting. And her newest release, this book Ruined, that I mentioned with Sarah Winfield Searle, out at First Second. Both those look interesting, and probably something I may check out at some point. Maybe after we finish our discussion of Alex and Ada, just kind of read it on my own, because those do look good. Those do look interesting.
Yeah. Um. All right. Anything else you want to say about Alex and Ada before we dive in?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I think I think
This
it's a
is the
quick read.
easiest. Yeah, it's the easiest like 3-week read we've ever asked of
Yeah,
anyone.
it is a quick read, which will go into my issue or kind of my nitpick about pacing. But it's a very quick read. Again, if you have any understanding or any previous knowledge of the way we understand androids and AI and pop culture, you'll have a basic understanding of what you're getting into. Like that first hurdle is already cleared for you. You know, you don't have to have seen Blade Runner or her or anything like that, but if you just understand, hell, if you've seen The Matrix, you understand the basic concept that's going
Right.
on here. That it's fundamental in all of these stories. So that first, whether it's science fictiony or fantasy hurdle, you're already beyond that. You're not really coming to the story for that. It's about seeing where they take that idea and what their spin on it, what their take is on it. So yeah, I think if it's don't think of it like it's another AI kind of thing. I think this one has a good message and an interesting take on this specific idea and this.
Yeah. And I think it's a fun read. It's not. I think we're playing up the philosophy of it, which I think is definitely there, and you can chew on it as much as you want. But this is not like a overly cerebral book that you're gonna like have to put on a record and think about life after every.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, no. Well, I
it's
don't.
not.
Yeah,
It's not that.
I don't think after every issue. I do think at times there are moments in this book when yeah you'll sit and chew on some of the ideas brought up in it. Again, because as you mentioned, any book on the treatment or the existence of AI is just a reflection of the way we look at human. So
Yeah.
I think there are times when for contemplation, when they get into some of those deeper philosophical questions that I think that the book does dive into. But yeah, overall, it's a very quick read, very light read. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, it should be great. I'm very eager to reread it. In fact, I just told Alex before we hit record that I was certain I hadn't finished the series, but it's so short that I guess I accidentally read all of it once. And then today I was like flipping through it to like see how much I had to read before I could really be ahead of the listener. And I was like, oh shoot, I just, this is all reread territory now. I remember all these story beats and everything. So, yeah, it's so fast you may accidentally read. But for next week, read issues 1 through 5, which is volume 1 or the first third if you're deluxe. It's a pretty clean break. It's 5, 5, and 5. It's not any of this, 4, 6, and 5 or anything like that.
Yeah, none of this Brubaker Phillips or BKV and Tony Harris random assortment. It's very straightforward.
Yeah, and the trades don't have titles. Like, this is just one full story in 3 parts.
I don't believe they have subtitles.
So, all that to say, I hope you pick it up, and no shade from us if you just binge the whole thing in one sitting. But we will be breaking it down into 3 weeks, and we will see you next week for part 1.
Peace.